what kind of plants do you want to grow for your purposes? What are useful herbs that are easy to grow and easy to use, and more than anything, that you will have a use for? No point growing a whole bunch of things that you don't actually ever harvest. What I like to suggest here is a couple of things. First of all, you can think about what general purpose medicines does your family use? In other words, do you have kids in the house where they're coming home with colds and, their immune system is getting trained, and that's all well and good, but in the meantime they've got a runny nose and a sore throat and earaches, and maybe you're catching more than you should because you're around them. So that would be one general purpose, sort of colds and flus type use that you might be wanting from your garden. Is there somebody in the household perhaps who has sleep problems, who has insomnia, or difficulty, like difficulty going to sleep at night and then not wanting to get up in the morning, sort of little bit of off-kilter schedule of sleep, things like that. Perhaps you want to grow herbs to help that. Those herbs are often also useful for anxiety and stress, and so we might be able to sort of double dip there. We might be able to choose herbs that work for a couple of different purposes. Still very sort of general purpose, stress, anxiety, or colds and flus. It's not terribly specific, but generally useful. It's great to grow those because you're going to likely have them in the, to have to use them at some point. High probability that they're going to get wanted. A little bit more specific, you might think about growing herbs for a healthy heart. So there might be somebody with high blood pressure or water retention, and so you might be able to grow herbs for that. You might be able to grow herbs for women's health, for hormone balancing. So let's talk about a few of those herbs, some of the things that are easy to grow, and what you can look at doing with this that's quite fun is to plant them in clusters by use. So you could have a corner of your garden, or you could have a bed or a planter that was set up for the flu. And when you have the flu or a cold, you go there to pick some plants for use. Right away, fresh, immediate use. Or you might have a section set up for sleepy time and anxiety. And so, especially if there's a child, you can go out with them and they can pick their own medicine. And that's really helpful. They like that. There's a better chance they're going to take it if they've had a hand in picking and even in perhaps growing some of their own things. So, for example, herbs that are easy to grow that would be used for fevers. So somebody who's coming down with a cold or a flu, that, when you have that feeling of achy, kind of chills and fevers, maybe headache, you're tired, throat's beginning to get sore, you're not really sick yet, but you kind of know you're going to get sick, you can feel it coming on. That's the moment to use a group of herbs we call the diaphoretics. So the diaphoretics make you sweat. They make the pores open and the blood go to the surface and you feel hotter, and that helps you release the heat at the surface. And so you're thinking to yourself, I was already feeling hot. Why would I want to persuade my body to be even hotter? And of course the answer is that your immune system is trying to heat up. Your immune system is releasing interferon to try to stimulate temperature, which will activate the immune cells and to some extent impede the action of viruses and bacteria. So if you have an infection, the natural response is to get a fever, and taking an aspirin to bring down the fever or a Tylenol to bring down the fever is not helpful. You actually want to encourage it. So we use the diaphoretic herbs, the ones you can easily grow. Yarrow flower is a diaphoretic. The leaf is a different action. It's drying and astringent. But the flower, drunk as a hot tea, makes you sweat. Now, I'm not talking about the gorgeous colored yarrows that are sold in garden stores. There's red and gold and pink and so on. The wild yarrow is white, creamy white, sometimes tinged with pale pink, but basically a creamy white. That's the medicinal one. Super easy to grow. perennial. So just leave the roots in the ground, harvest what you need, it'll come back. Catnip, very easy to grow, quite a pretty plant, blue flower. Be careful if you have cats, they do rather like it. But it also, aerial parts will help you to sweat a bit. If you have lots of space, you can grow an elder tree, the Sambucus. That flower, again, is a diaphoretic, is quite sweet and pleasant, which is helpful because the yarrow is a little bitter. So the elder flower is helpful as a diaphoretic. Now, interestingly, the elderberry of the purple or European elder is also a medicine for antiviral action. So it would be helpful as well if there's a cold coming on. You can throw some ginger in there, in that tea. You're not probably going to grow the ginger unless you're living in Hawaii or somewhere nice and warm like that. But for us in the freezing north, ginger, unless you have a greenhouse, it's not going to grow for us. But all of those, catnip, yarrow flower, elderflower, can all be grown in the cooler climates, and they would be used in this, again, diaphoretic tea. Now, you want to make a tea because the fluid is helpful. You're going to sweat, so you want to replace your fluids. It's very, very easy. If you're going to harvest fresh herbs, then you just throw them in a pot, pour the boiling water, and let it steep. We'll talk in a few minutes about how to dry some herbs, but if you want to use them fresh, you can just drink that as a hot tea with the fresh leaves, or rather fresh flowers, catnip leaves, yarrow flower, and elderflower. Some other things you can grow that are helpful for colds and flus and so on. If you have sinus congestion, you can grow plantain, not the banana, but the green leafy plantain. And I can almost hear some of our audience rolling their eyes thinking, growing plantain is a weed. And so it is. But nonetheless, a big healthy clump of plantain with nice juicy leaves is a medicine chest unto itself. We could do the whole hour talk just about plantain. So one of the things here I'm suggesting it for is to help to dry mucus and clear the sinuses. So you take a leaf, make the tea from that. Goldenrod, I mentioned previously, it's a beautiful cut flower, big clumping plant. You need space for that and height. Big, beautiful clumping plant, goldenrod. And sage, just garden sage, the kind you'd use for sage and onion stuffing. Those are all great plants for sinus congestion and mucus and stuffiness and clogged up ears and so on. Plantain leaf, goldenrod, aerial parts, the flowering tops, and sage leaves, and you make a tea from that. If there's a lot of infection, if you've got green gunk coming out of the lungs or blowing out of your nose, then you need to do some antimicrobials. So at that point, the sage is also useful, but you could be growing oregano, you could grow thyme. I mentioned echinacea earlier. You can grow garlic. Very easy to grow garlic. And you've got several medicines in the garlic. You can take the green tops, the flowering stalk that comes up and does a big curly top at the kind of curlicue at the top. That can be harvested before the bulb is even matured. So you've got a kind of like a green garlic spear there that you can chop up in little pieces, put into stir fries, cook with it, soak it in honey. If you let it go to flower, by the way, that's not a true flower. It's sterile. Garlic has been so bred for so long that it's lost its capacity to have sexual reproduction, and it's just a clone now. So you can grow garlic from the bulbs that you would be eating, or if you let it go to quote-unquote flower, inside of that there's tiny, tiny, tiny little bulbils, little micro bulbs of garlic. You can plant those, but you can also eat those. Garlic is wonderful to put in honey. Actually, the sage, oregano, thyme, they all go well in honey, and that then becomes the medicine. So you just soak the plant, soak the herb or soak the garlic in the honey, and then take a spoonful of the honey into the tea that you've made with perhaps your catnip and elderflower, for example. So enough about herbs for colds and flus. Those are all things that would be easy to grow in a small area, a small container, or a section of a bed for colds and flus. I think I have time to keep talking about a couple of other groups of herbs. So let's talk about herbs for sleep and herbs for stress. What could you grow easily in your garden or on your balcony, in a container, or in a corner of the veggie garden that would help you with stress and anxiety? So, depending on how much space you have, again, catnip is helpful. Valerian can be used. Now, valerian is interesting. Some people find this, it's the root that's the medicine. Some people find the smell quite strong and almost offensive. Some people, myself being one, rather like it. But be that as it may, you can dig the root and either chop a little piece fresh or dry it out, and then put that in a tea. If you have a big area, you can grow hops. They like to climb. They'll climb a fence. They'll climb over an old wall. And they'll climb up onto an archway if you have such a thing in your garden. And you can harvest the female flowers of the hops. That's exactly what they use to make beer, and that's a good medicine to help you sleep. You can grow blue vervain. That's verbena. And there are two varieties. The European one is rather small and insignificant in the garden, doesn't fill the space much. But the American Verbena hastata, or blue vervain, American blue vervain, is a large and beautiful plant with an impressive spike of purple flowers. Definitely worth growing. And another plant I grow quite a lot of that's wonderfully helpful in headaches and tension and sort of circular thoughts and busy brain. It's a plant called wood betony. Stachys botanica is the Latin name, wood betony or Stachys botanica. And that has a lovely purple flower as well, a clumping green leaf. Forms a nice clump about sort of 2 foot high, 2 foot across, and then big spikes of purple flowers. It's quite lovely in the garden, but also a good medicine for stress, anxiety, especially with headaches and tension. So those would be some herbs you could grow in the garden for the nervous system. California poppy does very well in most gardens. It's an annual, but it sells seeds. It's very pretty, and all the parts are medicinal. So with a California poppy, you're going to pick the flower, the stem, the leaf, all of it, the seed pod, the bud, and that's the medicine, again, as a sedative, relaxing, sleeping aid.